Princess Dracula, Book 1, Part 7, author John Patrick Kennedy.
When she could no longer scream, she prayed for deliverance. But God would not deliver her, she realized. He would look upon her and strike her down. She stopped praying and began to weep. She thought of Tony and Madison, of her clean white bed in the small cell of the convent.
Where I had the audacity to be discontent. Then Roxandra, Princess Dracula, sobbed for her lost childhood.
When she was numb inside, she remembered her father telling his men that he would return in the morning. They will find me, and they'll find the bodies, and they'll think I did it. I did do it. She shuddered. The fear of being discovered overrode the horror of what she had done. She pushed off the ground and rose to her feet. To her surprise, her legs didn't shake. She would leave. Maybe she could walk back to the convent. It had only been a day's ride, and the road was clear. All she had to do was get there. She would say something, anything. She picked her way through the puddles of blood and stepped over the bodies and went to the outer cavern. Her clothes were destroyed. Every piece had been cut open. The cloth stuck to the blood on her fingers. She picked up the remains of her robes and scrubbed at the blood on her hands and arms. It didn't want to come off, and she had to scrape at her skin. She dropped the robes and started to cry. I have to get out of here. I must leave before they find me. Her tears stopped. Anger flared at what her father and his soldiers had tried to do. I will not take the blame for this. She picked up the boots. They were intact, at least. Then went back into the inner chamber. She looked over the 4 dead men on the floor, unable to bear looking at her father and his blood-covered corpse. The man nearest the door was closest to her size. He wasn't a light man, and the armor he wore beneath his cloak and surcoat meant that he would be even heavier and harder to move. But she needed to get clothes if she was going to walk back to the convent. She reached down and tugged on his cloak. To her surprise, his body moved easily across the floor. To her even greater surprise, she was able to lift him. There was some blood on the collar of the cloak, but nothing compared to what covered her skin. She sat him up, wiped the gold from his helmet, and stripped the cloak and surcoat off him like he was a sleeping child. She wrapped both garments around her body. It wasn't the same as the warm clothes she had before, but it would do. As an afterthought, she took his belt as well and wrapped it tight around her waist. Finally, she put on her own boots, cleaned herself, and left the cavern. The light outside was as bright as day, and the air didn't feel as cold as it had the night before. Roxandra started walking back along the path her father had led her down. Ahead, she could hear soldiers arguing.
It's been a night and a day, one said. He said he'd be back in the morning, and he has yet to return. None of them have.
Another older voice said, so whatever they're doing, they're still doing it, or her.
One of the soldiers snorted. That girl is a harlot. Looked like a novitiate to me.
Thought it was his daughter, said another soldier.
One of his byblows, more likely. Well, either way, he's not going to be sticking it in her.
I don't know, you nobles are strange.
Laughter rippled through the company of men.
Enough, snapped a voice. He said he would be out in the morning. We must assume something is wrong and must go look. I'll lead. Who is coming with?
3 soldiers in turn said, me. Then let's go. A torch flared to life, then another. Roxandra stepped into the shadow of the cavern. Then she realized it was the wrong thing to do. She'd been planning to sneak up to the camp, find the road, and follow the horse's tracks back to the convent. But with the men coming toward her, there was no way she could take the path back. She stepped off the path and into the forest. The brush swished around her, sending snow scattering. She began running. The snow wasn't deep, and she could move well enough, but it made noise. She dared a glance over her shoulder. The men's torches were little sparks of light, twinkling through the trees. Roxandra stopped, confused. She could hear the men walking on the hard snow of the path, and the others talking and grumbling around the fire. She spotted them through the trees and could see the bright steel of their helmets reflecting the torchlight and their breath coming out in small, frosted puffs. She was seeing and hearing them as if they were 10 feet away, though they were easily 50 times that. And why do they have torches in the daytime? She glanced skyward. The sky was clear and bright, and the sun was nowhere to be seen. The moon and 1,000 stars shone upon her, lighting the world as bright as daylight ever had. What? How? She took a deep breath to calm herself. Then another. Then she noticed that when she breathed out, she could not see it. In this cold, her breath should have been an icy fog in front of her, but there was nothing. She took another breath and blew it out harder. Then another. Still no fog. Do not think about it, not now. It wouldn't be long before the men reached the cave. When that happened, she had to be far away. If they caught her, get away first. Get away and find the road and think about it all later. She began walking, ducking under branches and trying not to shake the snow off them. She listened as she walked, waiting for the men to shout for reinforcements. No sound came. She turned in the direction she thought the road might be and kept going. She could find it soon enough, she was sure. Then I can return to the convent. Once I tell Mother Superior, I am sure they'll take me in, and maybe they can bless me and take away the sins of what I've done. What my father did. The thoughts went round and round in her mind, though she knew there was no answer to be found or one she could accept. He did it because he could, because I did not matter. She thought of the fallen angel's scorn and kindness. Could a fallen angel care more about her than her own father? Yet what kind of care was it to make Ruxandra commit such crimes? Well, she was a fallen angel. My father didn't know what he was doing summoning her. Fool, she thought. Hours later, she had yet to find the road or anything at all. Lost. I'm lost. The fear she'd managed to suppress started welling up. She moved faster and faster until she was running through the trees, knocking down snow and cracking branches. I should have followed the guards. I should have stayed close, not gone in the opposite direction. I don't even know where I am. Think, Ruxandra. A valley. The cave was in a valley. She looked for any sign the ground was rising. I've been running the length of it instead of going up. The ground to her left seemed higher. She turned, then ran harder. The woods passed by in a blur. The ground rose and fell, then rose and rose and rose until she was sure she was out of the valley. She roused a burst of speed and broke through the woods into a clearing. She skidded, trying to stop, and ploughed to a halt halfway across the clearing. She looked back in surprise. The marks stretched back 30 yards. How fast was I going that I would do that? She tried to calculate it, but couldn't. She had to have been moving very, very fast. Faster than anyone had ever run. Faster than a horse. It isn't possible, none of it. And yet I am doing it, and I'm still lost. She had hoped the clearing meant she was near the road, but there was no sign of it. No sign of anything except the grey and brown branches of the trees, interspersed with the green spikes of the evergreens. She turned in a slow circle. There was no sign of people, no buildings, no smoke rising, no paths through the forest or stumps marking a woodcutter's work. As near as she could tell, she was alone in the world. The sky was growing lighter. The dark firmament with its many bright stars was giving way to the deep blue of pre-dawn. Soon the sun would be visible, and the snow would be even brighter, and she would be better able to see where she was going. Perhaps then there will be people out. Perhaps I cannot see anything because it's night, but when the sun is up, I'll be able to see the smoke and hear anyone nearby. She looked for a place to sit and found a log that wasn't too covered in snow. She dusted it off the best she could, then sat. At least I don't feel cold. I should be cold. It was one of those things that, like many others, she decided not to think about. She wrapped her arms around her body and waited. I wonder what Tony and Madison are doing right now. Praying, most likely. Ruxandra hoped Sister Sophia was doing far worse penance, preferably something involving the pigs. Cleaning the pans, she decided, with nothing to use save a brush or her bare hands. It was a silly fantasy, Ruxandra knew, but it passed the time and kept her from thinking of what had been done to her. How could he have done that? My own father. She turned her mind away from it and turned her eyes to the sky. She could see sunbeams peeking through the trees. It was bright enough to hurt her eyes. She watched as the sunshine slipped through the branches and crept its way across the ground. She had to squint. It was so bright. The closer it came to her perch, the warmer she grew until she felt like taking off the cloak. She should have been freezing, not hot. But as the light came closer, she felt like she did on a summer's day when the nuns excoriated the novitiates for removing their wimples to cool off. The sun crept over the snow and touched the toe of her boot. Ruxandra hissed and pulled her foot back. The touch of the sun had burned right through the leather. The surprise brought her to kick her feet. Sunbeams pierced the trees and branches and landed on the bare skin of her face. Then she was on fire and screaming.